Hello, welcome to Cpp.chat, a sometimes weekly look at what's going on in the world of C++, chatting with guests from the community. We'll introduce this week's special guest in just a moment, but first I'll hand over to Disclaimer to Reader John.
This disclaimer is in all uppercase, so you'll have to assume that I'm shouting this. On an as-is and as-available basis, Cpp.chat makes no representations or warranties of any kind, express or implied, as to the operation of this site or the information, content, materials, or products included on this site. You expressly agree that your use of this site is at your sole risk. Thank you all very much.
Didn't hear that. Could you say that again?
We are blessed this week. We have two organizers of a new C++ conference. Core C++ is going to be held in Israel, and it is the week immediately after C++ Now, which is going to be in Aspen. So I'm not sure how much crossover we're going to have between the two conferences, but it's not very far away, and it is the first year for this. So we have two of the organizers from that. Welcome, Adi Shavit and Michael Gopshtein. How are you guys?
Hello. Great.
Glad to be here.
Michael will just let us know he's overcoming a virus, so his voice is a little rough today. So are you guys excited about your conference?
Oh yes, extremely excited. I think it's going to be an amazing event, and we're super excited and hoping to see a lot of people, both from Israel and abroad. Yeah.
Well, before we dive into that, let's do a little bit of a wrap up of other stuff that's going around, particularly other conferences. Before yours is C++ on C. And what were you saying, Phil? 4 days away?
4 days away, yeah. As we record this, obviously, if you listen to the podcast, I don't know if I'll have time to edit this before the conference starts. It may have already happened.
Well, congratulations on such a great conference.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was so nice to see you again.
I've been hearing great things about it already.
Time flew by. It seems like only yesterday. Yeah, it's definitely very close. But tickets are still selling if you are listening to this live, especially for the workshops. One of them did sell out. I think we mentioned last time. It's the low latency workshop. The others still have places available, so there's still a few days for that.
Okay.
Other than that, you're too late.
All right. Well, I have a very important question to ask you about the conference.
Okay.
Do you have enough wristbands that say EastConst to hand out to all the participants that want to be EastConsters, which I'm sure they all will?
Well, this is, I think, the last one that I have for my collection.
Uh-oh.
So I thought I needed to order some more. And after looking around, it seemed that the best option was to actually order them from the States. And to make sure they actually arrived in time, I had them delivered to Matt Godbolt, because he's coming over as one of my keynote speakers. And I was speaking to him today, and he said, "Oh, those wristbands still haven't arrived." So I went to check the order, and it said that they were delivered 2 days ago. So he said, "Hold on a minute." He went outside, and he found them deep in the snow somewhere.
Wow.
So 1,000 wristbands have actually arrived, and they should be coming over to me by next week. So we should be all right. And that's just as well because, well, first of all, Peter Bindles has ordered 1,000 Const East wristbands, so we couldn't have that. Sorry, Const West. And two of the rooms at the venue we've named East Const and Const West. So it wouldn't really be appropriate if we didn't have the wristbands.
Oh yeah, I love the names of the rooms. I like that the bar is called Break.
Yeah. Semicolon.
Yeah, semicolon.
Very good, very good, very good. Well, I'll make this offer to anyone else. If you're going to a conference that Phil or I are not going to, contact me, and I'd be happy to send you wristbands to distribute at the conference, because we really want, or if you're attending a user group and you want to hand them out at a user group, something like that, please contact me, because I really want people. And if you have one, absolutely wear it when you go to a conference, wear it when you go to a user group meeting. And if you go to a standards meeting, absolutely, that's the main point, is to let people in the standards committee know that we want to be heard and we don't want to be silenced and shouted down like we're currently are being.
Yeah.
So what are the news?
Here.
Oh, there you go. Other conferences coming up. We have, there you go. We have ACCU, which is going to be in April. I guess before that is EMBO++, which is in March.
Right.
Both of them have registrations open. And then in May, we have C++ Now, which submissions are closed. Submissions are being evaluated right now. If you'd like to be on the program committee, please contact me about that. I'll send you information about being on the program committee. Registration is open. We are now taking rooms. And by the way, we have an issue this year. They were not able to give us as many rooms as they normally can at the resort there. So we are working on finding a backup room block. But if you would like to stay in the main hotel at C++ Now, do not hesitate to get your rooms nailed down right away. And then also in May is Core C++. Jumping ahead in June, Italian C++. I believe they've already announced that Andro is keynoting. I think you can still contact them about speaking if you're interested in that. So let's talk a little bit about Core C++.
Let's.
So how long have you been planning this? When did you decide, let's do a conference?
Well, actually, the story goes a little bit back about a year ago when I just started the Core C++ users group in Israel. Actually, by your prodding, John, and I spoke to you and Jens on Slack, and you said, "Yeah, just start the meetup group, and you'll see how many people are going to come." And
that's really the only way. You can't know how successful it'll be until you do it. You just have to do it.
And Meetup doesn't even give you the proper tools to gauge interest. It has these fields, and people, you have the ability to enter your tags you're interested in, but there's no way to actually do a search of how many people in your radius or whatever. So yeah, I just started the group, and I set almost an arbitrary date, a month and a half ahead for the first meetup. And I think Michael was the first person to suggest giving a talk. So we ended up, both of us were the only people speaking at the first meetup. And when I was preparing my slides for the first meetup, I didn't know how many people are going to come. I didn't know who's going to come. I didn't know anything. So I had this, in addition to the regular meetup, hopes and wishes, I had these stretch goals. And they went from the more mundane to the more ambitious. And the last line was, okay, let's have a C++ conference. Okay, and I wrote this slide before the first meetup of the users group. And last July, we had a very, very large and successful meetup in Tel Aviv, sponsored by, I think it was JFrog. They invited us to organize, they had their own conference there, and they said, okay, look, we have the venue in the evening. Why don't you come and organize the meetup? It was a great success, and they said, okay, we can't believe you brought all these people who stayed up until 10 p.m. to listen to technical talks. Let's do something more. And I said, okay, let's do a conference. It's on my stretch goal slide. And they said, okay, let's. And we started the ball rolling, and we had some different changes, and we found a venue, and more people got on board, and now it's in full swing. We already, our talk submissions ended last week. Or 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
Okay.
2 weeks ago, and I think we have about 20 slots altogether in 2 tracks in 2 days, and we got over 65 submissions. So
wow.
I think Phil, it's the same kind of problem you have. We're going to have to reject some really, really good talks and speakers.
So have you announced keynotes?
We announced one keynote. Jason Turner is going to give
because I know that he talked about it on Cpp.chat
last week.
Yeah, that he was planning to skip C++ Now because they were just too close together, and it was too big a problem to make. But when we have as many conferences in this community as we have, it's nobody's going to be able to go to all of them. Although people like Phil try, right? I mean. JFrog's been a great support, but so has JetBrains supporting the community. These companies that go to the conferences and are supportive. That's what makes these things possible. So
and
really
both are actually sponsors of our conference as well.
Yeah,
so they've been very helpful. Yeah. definitely.
So so you have 20 slots. Is that what you said? So it's 2 days.
Yeah, 2 days, 2 tracks, one one full English track. Especially if we're going to have international speakers, we can't have them sitting out on talks. And the other track is going to be mixed Hebrew and English.
I see.
So we can attract a broader crowd.
Okay.
I'm sure you guys know this, but it's really difficult to get to C++ developers. Somehow many of them are not very tightly connected to the community, and we find ourselves literally prodding people manually on Meetup, just saying, hi, welcome to the group, talk to us, and have you heard about this conference, and trying to grow. But I think we recently passed 700 members of our Meetup group in just over a year, which is
wow. That's very good. That's very good. Very promising.
But still, we feel like if you only start to tap into the whole community of C++ developers in Israel, and it must be much larger than they've reached so far. I hope that maybe more people will join the meetups and the conference, and these are great events. You can learn a lot of things, and how to enlarge
Yeah, it's a shame that there's so many, dark matter, which is the term that somebody coined. Yeah. Dark matter developers. These are people who don't emit light, right? They may or may not be reading blogs, but usually they're not participating at all in the community, and that's what we have to reach. We have to figure out how to get people excited about the fact that CPP, C++ is not just in a book. It's actually people out there doing this and talking about it, and if you're not involved in that discussion, then you're not helping the community grow in the right direction, and talking about the features that we want and what we want to work on, libraries that we want to develop, those kinds of things. So do you have a particular theme, or were you just saying this is going to be a general C++ conference?
No, this is a general. We had a go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, general one. So I already have the workshops published, and I think that all the workshops are really great. One from Phil on the unit testing, and one from Jason, from Dan Sachs, from Amir. Also one from Diego on the Conan. So these are really great workshops. It's a good opportunity for people basically to come to such sessions close to the home instead of the need to travel to CPPCon or the conferences. So I think that many people will enjoy and really learn a lot of stuff from these workshops and from the conference itself also.
So how many attendees are you expecting?
Well, I don't think we know. This is the big unknown.
Yeah.
I can tell you how many we're hoping.
Well, that's okay.
We're hoping to get around 200 people. That's between 150 and 200. This is like our sweet spot, I think.
Yeah, that's a good solid conference. That's a good number. That's more than what you're going to get at C++ now. And so you can have a great conference with that many people. What I was going to ask you also about is, I hear about high tech in Israel every once in a while, but I don't know. Are there industries that you're particularly well represented, or in the user group that you have now? What are the interests of the attendees of the user group meetings, or is there some specific industries that are well represented, or is it just more general?
I think it's general. Maybe the finance and the trading industries are pretty hot, but
that is an area where C++ really shines. Yeah.
Yeah, and like the embedded developers, there are many different areas, and we do expect people from different backgrounds to come and join the conference.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had people from all over. It's a very general population, I think. It's actually interesting because I haven't met anybody from the finance industry until we started the user group. So, and suddenly, like, we hear all these companies. Some of them are large international companies that have development centers here in Israel, and some of them are small Israeli companies that are mostly working abroad. So yeah, we've seen a lot of those, and embedded developers doing basically, you know, the same kind. I think it's more or less the same in many other C++ developer communities. So we're seeing a nice mix.
Yeah.
And we could have a meetup when somebody would come up to me after the meetup and said, you know, I really enjoyed the first talk, but the second one was not really up my alley. And then like a second later, somebody else would come and say the exact opposite. So,
yeah, right. I'm buried in survey results from last year's CPPCon, and I see exactly the same thing. Someone's complaining that, you know, it's too cold, and some people are complaining it's too warm. I mean, it's just yeah, exactly.
But I think that's a good thing. Like when we tried to set the program, we did in such a way that it, you know, people do. Israel is a really, really small country, so people like this, the sense of distance here is very much reduced relative to other countries, especially like the US. So like for people to travel 25 minutes, over 25 minutes is considered like okay, that's a long distance drive.
Right.
So we try to make it such that, you know, it's worth your while. Okay, you did come, maybe you drove 40 minutes or maybe 45 minutes. So you got we got your pizza covered, and we're gonna give you two full-length talks plus some news and updates, and also like another. We usually have like another like 10-minute corner in the meetups, and we use that basically to bootstrap a lot of the people who hopefully will talk at the conference. So,
right. So
yeah.
what's been for your submissions, and I know you probably don't want to talk about everybody who's submitted because it's confidential until you announce, but what's the mix been as far as international versus local in the submissions?
I think the most international, like 60-70% international,
yeah,
and the rest are local.
Well, that's a really good number for, you know, as young user group as you have, to have a third being local. Yeah, that's you're building up a good community. Then that's great.
Yeah, some of the people,
that's very good.
Some of the people said to ask in person to submit a talk, but it worked. I mean, they did, and that's what was important.
What? I'm sorry, I missed that. What did you say?
I said some of the people just needed to ask them to submit the talk, but
right. Well, that's
actually they did.
That's what you have to do. You have to encourage people, because that's what you want to do. Is you want to build up that local talent. The people who do speak at the conference are going to also want to speak again at your local group.
That's our hope. Yeah.
Yeah. To build that up. Yeah. I know that's what a lot of several of the conferences that are regional conferences that's kind of grown out of an active user group. And I think that the active user group supports the conference. This conference supports the active user group. In fact, that's the way I look at it. Even like CPPCon, which isn't really coming from a user group, but we're CPPCon. We very much try to support as many local groups as we can, encouraging, like we did with you guys, start one up locally.
Yeah.
Because I think that the conference wants to support all those local groups, and I think it's because the local groups support us, both in terms of encouraging people to attend the conference, and a lot of the local groups will have after a conference, they'll have a trip report meeting where people who went to the conference will talk to people who didn't and say, this is what was going on, this is what the feel of it was, and then these are the sessions that you want to see. If there's going to be recorded sessions or something like that. Will you be recording your sessions?
Yes.
We're trying, because this is a totally community-driven thing, so nobody's trying to, to make money off of the conference. So all of the tickets basically go to fund travel and accommodations for the speakers and taking care of the venue and the recording and all of those expenses. So it's
right.
Yeah. So hopefully it will all go online.
Yeah.
Just to mention, there are two user groups in Israel. So one is ours, and the second is in Haifa.
Uh-huh.
It's Haifa C++. and they also take an active part in the organization of the conference.
Excellent.
So Grant, who is the organizer of the group, is part of the committee of our conference, and so it's a joint effort between all the people who could find in Israel would be interested in making such an event. So.
Right. And is there going to be any? Are you going to sponsor a music festival at the same time so that people who want to have some music with their C++, is that going to be a problem for these people?
Yeah, it's funny you should funny you should mention that. We were expecting about 10,000 conference attendees. So the city of Tel Aviv set up a tent city to do that. But I'm guessing some of them are going to go to the Eurovision Song Contest, which happens in the same week. Yeah,
I see.
Yeah, so the dates, we didn't want the conference to be in the summer because Tel Aviv gets really hot in the summer. And we wanted, like, the spring is an amazing time to come to Tel Aviv and to come to Israel. So the venue actually where it's going to happen is the Academic College of Tel Aviv Yafo. And they're actually one of the major sponsors and organizers of the conference. And Amir, this is like our fourth committee member, is really helping us with the venue and with the organization. So they're right smack in the middle of Tel Aviv, and it's a beautiful campus. And the dates of the conference that we had are due to the semesters of the students. So we wanted it in June, but that's like the time where all the students they have their exams. So we picked May, and then only after we announced it, we noticed that it's a week after C++ Now and on the week of the Eurovision. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it does sound like fun, but people need to make their travel arrangements because there's going to be issues there, right?
Yeah, accommodation is going to be an issue. We did make some hotel block reservations. So if people are traveling, get in touch with us. We got some special conference discounts at nearby hotels. But the sooner you make the reservations, the better, because Tel Aviv is expected to be full of partying Eurovision enthusiasts. Yes.
So some of those block reservations are in tents, are they?
Yeah, no, actually, we had to. But I think the tent city is an option if you're really into it. But I don't have the details.
Okay. So we did have one article that has caused a little bit of discussion, and that is by Vector Boole, although I think I did look up his name. What is his name?
I forget now as well.
Anyway, I'll look that up. But he posted a blog post saying C++ modules might be dead on arrival. You want to give us a little bit of this, Phil? What's he talking about?
Well, this has been a long-standing complaint. And what's interesting is it seems to be still not completely addressed by the modules proposal. And it's really about the toolability, but in particular, the build system toolability of modules. And it stems from the fact that when you import a module, you import it by name, but there's nothing to map that name to which files need to be compiled to produce the module. So either you have to just compile everything and then hope that that module drops out of it, or you have to have some deterministic way to map those names to what you then need to compile. And the idea is to make this parallelizable. You really need to make that lookup lazy, so that at the point that you encounter the name, you then can go off and say, has that already been compiled? And if not, compile it at that point. And then as an extra level on top of that, to add to the non-determinism, assuming you do find the files, you still have to run the full preprocessor over the module definition before you can actually tell what the module name is going to be. So you still don't know until you've actually basically compiled the file. So those two problems together, if they can't be worked around, can be definitely a real killer for the performance promises of modules, which is one of the big things that most people were hoping for. So there's a bit of a story to it. So I encourage you to read the article by Colby Pike. I think John's just put up. And I haven't looked into it enough to know exactly whether those problems are still there, because it seems that some people on the committee seem to think it's not a problem. So I'm quite interested to hear from people that know more about it than I do to chip in. But it definitely seems to be a concerning problem, because we are getting very close to approving modules for C++ 20 in just a few weeks, I think, is the next meeting.
Right.
If it goes in its current form, it could have this glaring issue, or maybe it won't go in at all if the issue does come up. So either way, it's a bit concerning at this stage.
So, one of the things about, classic C++, the way we do includes, and he kind of does a summary of that in his article about, okay, let's step back and take a look at how we do includes. And we're used to the fact that there's actually something there that is not in our code, which is when we give the name of a file, we say include this file, and we don't specify in our code where that is. That's something that the compiler has to know somehow. And we just it's such a small thing, and we're used to it, and we don't think about it. But really, if all you have is the source code, usually you can't build something, because you have to somehow tell the compiler, oh, and by the way, here's where to look for these other files. And we say, well, that's minor. You put in a path. But we've kind of, we fudge it because it's not that big a deal. But the standard actually explains the difference between angle brackets and quotes. And no one ever seems, first of all, I've met very many people who actually know what the standard says about that. And people have their own ideas about what it actually means and how to use it. I have this thing when I give my talk. Sometimes I ask people about the angle brackets, because the way the standard actually treats that is only something that appears in angle brackets is called a header. So we think about headers all the time. Oh, here's my foo.h. It's a header. Well, according to the standard, foo.h is not a header, because it's only a header if it's a standard, vector is a header. But anything you write, that's a user file. And headers are files that are provided by the implementation. And the standard is a little weird in this, because in most of the standard, it looks as if what they mean is only standard files are headers. But in some of the commentary about versions, if you read the standard, there's always this section that says, well, this is the difference between the last standard and this standard. And it gives some examples. And in there, it kind of says that POSIX files that are not part of the standard, but are part of the POSIX implementation, those would also be considered headers. So it's a little, the standard itself is not really all that clear on what a header is. But anyway, this whole area is just kind of all glossed over. It's outside of our source code. You say include, and you just expect the file, the compiler is going to find that. And I think that modules has taken this, at least we gave it a file name. But with modules, we don't even have a file name anymore. So somehow the compiler has to figure out, when you say, include this module, which I think is kind of a good thing, in that we give it a name in the C++ world, and we're divorcing it from what file it has to be in, which is, the pound include is such a physical tie that it's not really, from a language purity point of view, it's kind of a wart in the language. It's part of the reason why people want to get rid of it. But if you go to a pure language thing and you say, well, import this module, now how does the compiler know what file that's in or where to find that file? And as he's pointing out, as Colby's pointing out in his talk, you don't, or in his blog post, you don't even know, if you knew what file was in, you don't know what the name of the module that file is going to be until you pre-process the whole module and look for where it says, oh, I'm exporting this name. And I think it's a problem that we can hand wave around, and I think that's what a lot of the standard, that's what a lot of people in the committee are kind of doing. It's, oh, well, somehow you'll tell your compiler where to find these files, and we'll develop just like we do now with we have kind of a convention that says, oh, there's a class called foo, and the header for that foo, the declaration of that is going to be in foo.h or foo.hpp, and it's just a convention, and it works, and everybody understands it. but where does this convention come from? And if we're going to expect compilers to know this, then someone has to either define it specifically or leave it completely and say, okay, compiler magic, somehow the compiler is going to know, and how is that going to happen? And I think these questions should be discussed before it becomes part of the standard. And I don't know that those, I think a lot of that discussion has happened, but I don't think anybody has nailed it yet. I don't think it's been made formal. Or maybe I'm misreading the situation.
The impression I get, and again, I haven't really been involved in the meetings where this has been discussed. I've just more heard what's been said afterwards. Seems like, yes, it has been discussed, but the relative importance of the issue we're talking about now hasn't been considered high enough by those that are actually making the decisions, compared to the other wrinkle, which is C++ compilers need to work in environments where they don't have a file system in the sense that we understand it. There are limitations that don't allow that one-to-one mapping necessarily. And they might be quite rare, but they're very real. And I don't think everyone thinks that that's necessarily a showstopper, but that often seems to be the sticking point, is my understanding.
I always find conventions, programming by convention, kind of a code smell. I mean, sometimes, but it's a language level smell. And there are many frameworks that have, the only way you can work is if you understand conventions. And I think what you mentioned about header files, it's not such a convention, because theoretically, it only, if you have like IDE tools that need to match between the implementation file and a header file, it might look at the extensions, but the compiler doesn't really care about the names. It may be a syntax highlighting. But you could, I don't think the compiler doesn't even checks the extensions, or at least not for the simple compilation stuff. You can include anything you want, and it will just copy and paste that. So it's not it's not a very strong convention that will break your code. And I think there is probably an active, C++ actively doesn't try to use conventions for things. Maybe I'm wrong here, but
no, I think you're right. The convention is for humans. I mean, if I'm looking for the class foo, I know where to go. But the compiler doesn't care. Yeah. And in fact, foo may have a number of different classes in it, none of which happen to be called foo. But that's something that you need to discuss with your people on your team about, if you want them writing code that looks like that, where you can't find where the class is and you don't know what header to look for. But that's but the point is that we are now in a situation where we're going to start saying include this module, and we now have, the compiler has to know, well, okay, where did that module come from if I'm going to physically build it? And that's, maybe it's outside the compiler's problem, maybe it's a build tool problem, but the compiler is a build tool as well. So that has to be done somehow.
Maybe it's like a linker, but it's like a pre-compilation linker, which does the lookup of the names, just like a linker does at the end of the compilation.
And how does that mean? That means that this pre-linker has to scan all the files to find out which headers or which source files are creating which modules. And as Colby's pointing out, you actually have to run a complete preprocessor. You can't just scan it looking for specific tokens because we have the preprocessor. And so you have to run the full preprocessor in order to find those. He suggests, Python has a way of solving this where things are, Python mandates that things be laid out in a certain way. If you want to, include something, it has to be, down, you specify the file path that it goes down, and, it's because it's all done, it's an interpreter. So things are laid out in a certain way. And we could document that and we'd say, okay, this is what your source file has to look like. But as Phil has pointed out, not every environment that you want to be able to host a compiler on necessarily has the same kind of thing as we think of as a file system. It doesn't necessarily have directories the way we think of them. And the standards committee has been slow to try to mandate that. And I think it's for very good reason. But now we're faced with this situation, and I think underspecifying it is an approach. And I'm not sure it's the best approach, but that's what we're kind of having now. It's like the compiler will somehow know what this means. And that's kind of scary.
Friend of the show, Robert Ramey, is saying in the chat, how about going into DLLs and visibility as well? And then next mention static libraries. And of course, none of these things are directly related to modules, although there's a connection there. But the underlying problems that mean that they're not really in scope for the standard, a lot of the same underlying issues there. So if we do set a precedent with modules in this, then that's going to open the door to discussions about all of those things as well, which may be a good thing or it may be something we want to avoid. But it is a thing, I think. So as Robert says, yeah, it's pulling on the yarn of a very large sweater.
Yeah. I think it sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you're gone.
I think I sometimes have like the feeling where the standard tries to define only extremely low-level things. It kind of misses a lot of opportunities. Again, I haven't read the modules proposal. I'm kind of waiting for it to become more mature. So I'm just, but if you think about, I read some of the earlier coroutines definitions, and those are extremely low level and if you try to read it, it takes a lot of work just to understand how this is actually supposed to work. And I understand that now there's a lot of controversy about if that's really the way to go. But if you're only providing very low level stuff, which is essential, of course, it's
well, that is where you have to start, right? I mean, if you're gonna,
I think that's the philosophical. It's a policy decision. Do you start there and you stop there and you keep the rest for the next version of the language, or you provide multiple levels and at least, okay, you have the low level part so you can write anything yourself, but you also provide something a bit more mature, a bit more handle the typical use cases, like, networking libraries. And Boost Azure is like a very classical example where beginners find it very hard to get started because it sells itself as a low level, high performance library, but doing the basic stuff takes too much work. So,
well, I mean, I think a better example to think about here is not networking, but multi-threading, right? Because it used to be in classic C++, multi-threading was automatically undefined behavior. I mean, what people were obviously doing it, but you always did it in such a way that someone was saying, okay, this library has been tested and is guaranteed to work as long as you're using this platform with this OS, whatever. Because the language itself never made any guarantees about a lock or anything like that. It was just all completely undefined behavior. But that's kind of unacceptable for us. We got to define that. So starting with 11, we've now defined that. And I think the same thing needs to happen with something like dynamic versus static libraries. Right now, dynamic libraries are essentially undefined behavior. That, the standard doesn't say anything about them. It has no concept of the idea that we have, say, static data, and we know that that is initialized when before the beginning of main. But we don't have a concept of, oh, and if you load this library at runtime, then certain things happen as a side effect of loading the library. The language doesn't have any concept of that. And we're slow to want to define that because the platforms are different enough that if you say, okay, then when this happens, we guarantee this happens. Well, on some platforms, that might be really hard to guarantee. So we have to, that's why this is always such a hard thing to do. I mean, if all platforms, if we only had one platform, we just have Windows. And so this is how dynamic libraries get loaded. And that's just what they are. Well, that would be pretty easy to do, but that's not the world we live in. And so when we define these things, we go slowly, we define at the low level and go forward. And I think that's, I mean, even with multi-threading, this is kind of what we did. We tried to do some high-level stuff. We tried to make async and futures work, and I think that the way futures were defined, kind of this weird, I think we kind of missed the boat there. And I think we've got a long way to go in there. And I think, but I think it's the only thing we can do, right? What?
Future has no future.
Yeah. but that's what you have to do. And I think the same thing, I hope that eventually we will find a way of standardizing dynamic libraries because a lot of people use them and rely on them and it's necessary for what they do. And yet, they're completely unportable. And maybe that's just inevitable. Maybe there's just no way to do something that makes sense in the standard, and we just have to say that's always not portable. I don't know, but I would like to believe that as we go forward, someone will figure out a way of specifying dynamic libraries that can be implemented portably in the same way that we did with processes.
Well, interestingly, I don't think it's dynamic libraries per se that are the problem. And in fact, I think in the one of the evolution groups at the last meeting, there was a proposal that went through. I think it got forwarded on. Not sure what the status of it now, but it related to, if I remember rightly, defining some attributes for the purpose of specifying dynamic linkage. At least some of it. It wasn't like a full-on, here's how we're going to support dynamic libraries, but it was a nod in that direction that we need a standard mandated way to define these things because everyone's doing it anyway. But that didn't touch the file system. It didn't touch anything to do with the environment. It was just a pure sort of abstract attribute that you can interpret in that way. So I think there is a little bit of an appetite there to standardize things that will help. But it's that aspect of going outside the compiler to the environment that seems to be the sticking point. And that's the same with the modules situation. So
well,
again,
I mean,
it's about setting the precedent, I think.
But I think the parallel there, I think they are parallel, but you change from being concerned about the file system to being concerned about the OS, right? Because the OS is going to treat dynamically loaded libraries. Different OSs will do that differently, just like different file systems are gonna be,
Right, but then we have the same situation with include files, whether you call them headers or not. There are aspects of that mechanism that are implementation defined, and then there is a part that is completely defined in the standard. And we could move towards a similar situation with dynamic libraries. There will be mechanisms within a language that are well defined, have specific meaning. Then it sort of stops at a point where we say from this point on it's implementation defined. And that can still be better than where we are now for similar reasons.
Yeah, I think the only thing the standard really requires is that the location of a file can be designated with a string. And that's all it says. It says nothing about the format of the string or anything like that. It just says, okay. And it's using both for includes, because when you do a pound include, you don't have to just put the name of the file. You could put an entire path there. I mean, you put whatever, right? That's completely undefined what that is, unless it's in angle brackets, in which case it's a standard provided thing. And again, some kind of magic has to know when you say pound include vector, the compiler has to know what that means. And the standard doesn't say how it knows that, but it does. And then when you open a file, again, you translate a string of characters into a file, and the format of that is completely unknown. That's the only requirement we put on it. The vast majority of systems that real users use a hierarchy of a directory inside a directory, or maybe it's called a folder or something like that. But I mean, we have really, really similar approaches in the real world, but the standard is much more vague than that. It's possible that files could just be numbers. Say, okay, open 27 now, and the standard would be fine with that. And but I think when you start to get into what's the behavior when we load a library, that's going to be hard to specify. At least it seems to me.
I think that DLLs also, I mean, we kind of strayed from the modules, but they also touch on things like runtime reflection at the end of the day. If you really want to do it properly, then you have to at least gaze in that direction. And people in C++ are very reluctant on doing that because, that's totally not C++, right? So if you want to do some kind of, if you're loading something dynamically, you want to make sure that somehow your types match, and otherwise it's UB anyway. And it's a whole can of worms that I think nobody really wants to stick their hand in there, because it's not just about lookups of files. It's about matching tables, and again, assuming the compiler or the standard never wants additional files that are non-C or non-C++, like make files or script files or definition files, then we're kind of trying to pull ourselves out of the swamp from our hair, right?
Right. And I can understand why people don't want to get in that business. But if you don't get in that business, then what happens is you have a huge disparity. I shouldn't say disparity. You have a huge variety of approaches in what the way people package their source. And now we're in this situation where people are trying to build package managers, and the fact that, oh, libraries may look like this, or they may look like this, or they may look like this. There's all these different varieties, and it's really hard to get to reason about a library in a generic way because I mean, there's some historical reasons for this, but I think that languages that have been developed more recently than C++, have approached this in a way where they include the idea of, oh, well, you're going to be able to download a library and just use it. And it makes their lives so much easier than in the C++ world, where adding a new dependency is such a real pain because of the fact that we haven't specified anything outside, the language itself is very, very well specified. And the world in which it lives, that environment in which it lives, that's kind of whatever. It's conventions and history and all these kinds of things. And trying to specify it is a real, real pain. But if you don't have that, then you have this other real pain of people, they didn't have any guidelines, so they all went off in a different direction. And then you can't reason about it across all the different approaches that you'd like to be able to do that with.
I think we're going to have another dependency manager and build systems episode.
Isn't that like every other episode?
Yeah, that's right. That's about all of it. That's our big pain point.
We keep straying into it, but let's get some people that actually know this stuff back on.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, we got into it because of Colby's blog post, and but I think it's an important topic, and I know this is one of the things that that was discussed a lot at CppCon, this build issue, and I was thinking that somehow we'd made some progress on it and it wasn't as big an issue, but reading it, Colby kind of suggests that it's still a very much an open issue, and so that was why I brought that up.
So the main thrust of the issue that Colby brings up was around performance and determinism, but particularly how that affects performance, the module system, because so many people are thinking, when we get modules, it's going to make my code compile much faster. And again, Robert in the chat has been saying that people have a million lines of code of heavily templated header code, that they're not going to get the speed ups that they expect. Interestingly, one of my previous jobs, I did have a million lines of code of heavily templated header code that took over an hour to compile, parallelized, so over 32 cores, I think. Still took over an hour. And we experimented with different ways of doing pre-compiled headers. And we found in the end that because we had numbers of different projects that built different DLLs on a Windows system, we found if we could share our pre-compiled headers between projects, we could actually get the build time down to under 10 minutes. And that's the sort of performance improvement that I was hoping for originally from modules, that I still think would be achievable if we get this right. But obviously with these problems, that could get in the way of that. In that particular case, I think rewriting the whole thing from scratch, we could probably do it in a minute, but that's another question.
Right, but what he's saying is that includes are much more friendly to parallelization because they are standalone, right? Whereas
the way that modules are currently specified, yes, but not necessarily inherently to includes versus modules. If we have the deterministic lookup, then we can actually solve that problem.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if the standards committee said, "Oh, look, you have to have a file somewhere in your source that says this module is found here," right. And I'm not sure that's that big a requirement. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you could say, "Oh, the compiler builds this file for you, or your IDE builds this file for you," and I mean, how often is it going to change? How often are you going to create a new module from scratch? So so maybe the first time you ever build your project, it's slow because it has to brute force find all the modules. And then once they're found, it creates this file, which you could then edit to add a new module or whatever. But once that file's there, then we have deterministic lookup. It's easily parallelizable, and we get the 6 times speed up that you saw in your project.
So it's an interesting point. How often we'll be creating a new module? The impression I'm getting from the way people are talking in the committee is that we're expecting modules to just be everywhere. Like everything's going to be a module, which means we'll possibly be creating modules very frequently. So I don't know if that impacts what you were just saying, but that is a consideration that we could be living in a very different world with respect to modules. Once we actually get them in the standard, we might be thinking, oh, we could use them here, we could use them there to get these improvements. But if we fundamentally change the way we use our language, that could actually just give it a different topology to the whole problem.
Actually, that's the kind of advice that I often give developers when I see somebody doing a monolithic library that does everything, and I just want to use one part. I always, break it up into smaller libraries, and I'm guessing this is the exact same logic for modules that you're referring to, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more that modules should become the default way that we componentize our code bases, rather than classes and header files. Obviously, we still use classes and things, but the module will become a very common currency in our code bases, is the expectation. Not just something that we'll use in these places where we think we might benefit from them, but actually use them everywhere.
Yeah, I can see that. It makes me wonder if there's going to be, at some point, we're going to wish we had super modules. In other words, maybe I want to include your, I want to use your graphics library. So I want that to be a module that I include. But within your graphics library, maybe there's, several dozen different individual classes. And you have internally architected each one of those as its own module. And I don't want to really have to include all those modules. What I want to include is your module, which is the super module, which includes all the other modules.
I think we'll have to see how the idioms emerge and what problems they bring. But we've got to get modules in the first place. That's
yeah.
That's the roadblock at the moment. And I think we definitely need to have a modules episode.
Yeah, somebody's suggesting to get opposing opinions on the show.
Never short of those. Yeah, I think we should get Robert Ramey and anybody else on.
Robert's one of my favorite guests because he doesn't hesitate to speak his mind, but he also comes up with ideas that I never would have come up with. And so that's what I like. It's a fresh perspective. So thank you very much, Robert, for hanging in the chat room, but also for being on. Renee has missed most of the show. Renee just came in and says, "Is it over?" So we do. Robert says he likes lurk mode. I think he wants to kibitz more than he wants to be on the show. So maybe we'll reach out to Colby and see if we can get him on. And maybe someone who has a contrary opinion who says that this is that we're ready to go. Let's vote it in and let's ship it. And either the problems aren't really problems, or else they're things that we can solve easily after we specify it in the language. I don't know. That would be interesting to do. Were there other topics that we wanted to cover? This one did kind of derail us a bit.
Yeah, sorry for throwing that in. So Renee says, sorry I missed this. I was in a telecom with Gabby.
Well, Renee's been working a lot on the build system issue. So it was probably, I don't know what the telecon specifically was, but I'm hoping there's serious discussions going on in this, that we get it right, because it's the kind of thing that's really painful to get wrong. anything that we put in the standard that's wrong, it's really painful. Not as much library stuff. We can work around that, despite Vector Bool reminding us.
Yeah.
Colby's name is Vector Bool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a problem. Point I was going to make earlier, actually.
Yeah.
It's easy to get the impression from this that the committee, certainly those that are looking at modules, are asleep at the wheel. They're definitely not. There's a lot of active discussion going on. Yeah. These problems are being taken seriously. It's just not necessarily seriously enough. And there is another paper that it is linked from Colby's article, but I think it's worth pointing out directly. P1427R0, concerns about module toolability. So this paper has been written. It's got 6 or 7 names on it, but there are plenty of other people that contributed to it as well. Just going through all of the problems with the modules proposal, as it was, I think, a few months ago. Don't know if that's changed since. So these things are being discussed, just not necessarily going in the direction that some people would like.
It looks like Renee's name is on.
There he is. He just came online.
Colby says you want to have 22 people on at once.
Yeah.
Well, we can have 22 people in the chat room, but we probably can't have 22 people on the microphone at a time because that would be a nightmare. But we do want to talk about this stuff. So maybe we've veered off heavily into this from our talk. Is there anything we want to talk about in your user group or conference while we still have you? We have just a few minutes left here. How have you been for finding, do you meet once a month?
Yes, we have monthly meetings.
So how have you been for finding your monthly speakers? Have you been having to push really hard to get that? Are you and Michael doing all the talks, or are you getting, are you building up a local community of speakers?
Yeah, I think we haven't given a talk in quite a while. I think most of the latest talks I've given I've been at conferences. The thing I try to do is really to try to build a community. So I always have like we do a news and updates where we talk about stuff that changed within the group and upcoming conferences. And I tell people, I explain. We usually have new faces, so I always go back to the same slides and explain our goals and how you don't have to be an expert to talk. You actually talk to become an expert, and how we like introductory talks and everything. So. And we're always booked at least 2 months ahead. So when I tell people, come and give a talk, it's not that like I'm going to tell you to come next Tuesday. It's you have at least 2 months, and we can discuss it. We can review your slides and figure something out. And we're very open to any suggestions. And so yeah, we've been having a lot of very interesting talks. People we've never known, and they just come some amazing speakers. Hopefully this momentum just increases and doesn't taper out.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're doing a good job of coaching, because I think coaching speakers is really something that the user group can do well, and not all of them do. But you know, encouraging people and say, is there a library that you wish you knew better? Well, commit yourself to a talk in 3 months, and you will know it better, because you'll have you know, as you said, you don't give a talk because you're a speaker. Because you're the expert. You become the expert because you've given the talk. It forces you to do the research, to think it through, and to think it through very deeply, because you have to explain it to someone else. All the things that I know because I did a talk on it, and I had to think it through to understand it. I learned this when I was in college. I did a little bit of tutoring of math. And I had always gotten A's in math. I thought I understood it. But when I had to explain it to somebody else, I realized there's more to understand than I had originally thought. And the same thing is true when you're talking about C++. If you decide, oh, I'm going to give a talk on fill in the blank, by the time you give that talk, you will know a lot more about it. You'll really understand it better. And so I think it sounds like you're doing a good job of coaching people, letting them know, you know, go ahead, sign up. You'll have a few months to prepare your talk, and by the time you do, you'll be the expert.
Yeah, we have something called we call the C4GC. It's the Core C++, C++ Core Guidelines Corner. And the name is actually longer than the corner because the corner is just 10 minutes. So yeah, people, whenever people say, I've never spoken before, but I want to try. And I say, you can come and give this, just go to the core guidelines, pick a few guidelines of your choice and come and explain them, because the guidelines are way too large to really, for anybody to really know them well. So any topic you choose there is going to be new to most people, and it's just 10 minutes and at the beginning of the meetup. So even if you do a bad job, people there are still 2 more talks after you, and it's a great way to gain experience, and it's usually a very fun and people like it. Oh, and there's one more thing that I like to do at the beginning of every meetup, and this is something I like selling to other meetup groups. It's something I saw at Code Dive last year, and I adopted it from the first meetup. I call it Meet Your Neighbor. So I give the attendees 3 minutes to turn to somebody who's sitting next to them and that they didn't come with, and just introduce themselves. And instead of, we're engineers, we sometimes sometimes socially awkward. So in this case, we're actually reversing that, and it's awkward not to do it, right? So everybody starts talking, and then I literally have to almost violently stop them talking. Pick it up at the break, and the next time they come to the meetup, they already know each other. And I think this is making also a huge difference for people. They feel more comfortable, and the group becomes familiar, so they feel less stressed out coming and giving talks. So it all kind of rolls up into this community building effort.
Also, the content for the meetup sessions is much more flexible. For example, for the conference, like the last time, the session, which was more theoretical on cryptography algorithms, and then we went to the libraries which implement it. But basically, on the meetups, we cover a much wider range of topics than just purely C++ related. So, but also, it may open it to more people to come and speak about the things like they encounter at work, at studies, and so on.
Yeah, that's if you want your local user group to talk about something that you're interested in, one way of making sure that happens is for you to give the talk.
Exactly. Yeah. And I believe like everybody who's doing C++ on a daily basis, almost every day you hit something, you have like this micro aha moment.
Yeah.
And this could be a tweet, or it could be a blog post. And if it's a blog post, it's a talk, right? So, or a lightning talk. So you just gotta keep your eye out, and they're all every day you hit those.
Are you going to have
building files?
Are you going to be doing lightning talks at the conference?
I think we have that's TBD yet. We haven't arranged that yet.
Okay.
I saw Phil just opened his call for lightning talks yesterday, so I don't feel that we're in any hurry.
No. It's not. It's certainly not too late to have them lined up. What I meant was, though, are you planning to? I know Michael Case, who does lightning talks at both C++ Now and CPPCon. He likes to do them in the evening. He thinks that they work better in the evening. You're a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more willing to consider offbeat ideas, I think.
Yeah, that's still things we're talking about. This we're thinking maybe to have some kind of hackathon. For again, we have a lot of ideas, and we just want to. It's still 5 months away, and we have to see the mix of people who are interested, and we're just playing it by ear, because.
I don't want to scare you, but I think it's closer to 4.
Experience is hearsay from you guys, so it's, I'm just copying you, and we're just picking and choosing from the NDC guys, from CPPCon, CP Now, C++, and C. Everybody, we're reading the Slack channels, and okay, this sounds like this could work. This could work. So we're just borrowing from each other, but I think this is the meta community, right? This is how it should be, and yeah. One cool thing we had. Like for lightning talks, we had fortune cookies made with lightning talk topics. So everyone, again, I'm trying to reverse the natural tendency to not participate. So
yes,
you took a cookie, now you owe us a lightning talk. And that worked. Yeah, that was really fun.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
So I think we are actually past time here, so we need to start wrapping it up, right?
We do, yes, yeah. Unless we want to go for the just step up to the 1.5-hour slot.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Well, thanks for joining us, and best of luck. Best of luck with the conference, and thank you for joining the community and extending the community in Israel. I think it's wonderful, and I think it's a great success story to say. What did you say? 1.5 years ago is when you decided, well, let's start. I wish there was a user group here. I guess I have to make it myself. That's the only way.
Just over a year.
Less than that.
Yeah. And I hope that gives hope to other people who are saying, gosh, I wish in my state or in my country there was a user group. And it's like, well, guess what? It's up to you. You can make it happen. And you may find out that there are a lot of people just waiting for you to have started that. And they jump on board and say, well, can I participate as well?
And find a great co-organizer. I mean, Michael is he's quiet because he's kind of getting over his cold, but
right.
He's an amazing co-organizer. And he's actually the producer. He makes all the videos for YouTube. So I'm totally in that too. And it's a great team.
Thanks.
Yeah, definitely find someone to share the workload with. It makes all the difference.
Yeah.
All right. So we should wish everybody safe coding. Stay away from the cutting edge.
Modules considered harmful.
Oh. Okay,
don't say that yet. All right. Well, please join me then in wishing everyone and saying safe coding.
Safe coding. Safe coding.